Hey guys, and welcome back to a brand new video, and yes, you've guessed it, it's another gimbal review video, and specifically the FeiyuTech AK2000. So without wasting any time within this video, this gimbal will set you back about £380. It can have a payload capacity of about 2.8 kilograms. It has a touchscreen LCD display right on the handle of this gimbal, which is incredible because you can easily and simply switch between your different modes. You don't have to remember those double clicks and presses and LED flashes or anything. And this is actually my new favorite gimbal, and I've actually been using this since I got it a couple of months ago. When you receive the gimbal, it comes packed inside this carry case. In here you will find the gimbal itself, a battery charger with 4 batteries which take about 5 hours to charge and last for about 12 hours, 4 cables to connect the gimbal to different types of camera brands, a mini tripod, a lens support, and a few different screws to attach your camera to the gimbal. One really cool thing about this gimbal is that we can actually unlock it here, which means the gimbal can pack down a lot smaller and be able to fit into most bags. And when we have packed it down smaller, or when we're just carrying the gimbal around, unfortunately, the motors do just freely spin. They haven't actually got any locks on these motors, which would have been really nice to have seen. A nice design choice to actually lock the motors so when we're carrying it around, it's not just going to spin and flip around. So I wish they kind of added that, but unfortunately they haven't. Now, if I put this back on, you can see how quick and easy it is to lock that in place. It's as easy as that. And now we can actually take a proper look at the gimbal, the design, the build quality of it, and I can show you why I actually really like this gimbal. The handle has a nice soft rubber grip, so it doesn't feel too slippery when we're holding it. And for me, I think the main selling point of this gimbal is that LCD touchscreen, which is used to show and change the different modes of the gimbal. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. On the front, there's also a joystick which allows you to control the gimbal, and around that joystick there are 4 buttons: the power, video, picture, and mode button. On the left of the gimbal, you will see there is a wheel, which again I'll talk about in a minute. And on the back of the gimbal, they've included a trigger button to easily use certain modes. So when using the gimbal in a certain mode, I can then press the trigger button, which will switch it to the different mode I actually want. I can then use the trigger button as a different mode. I can let go and then it will go back to the previous mode I was using. And on the right of the gimbal, there's a micro USB port and a lock button, which is actually really useful to be able to lock the buttons so we don't accidentally press them when we're using the gimbal. But unfortunately, the micro USB port isn't used for charging. You have to remove the batteries from the gimbal and use the included charger, which is a shame when we're traveling that we have to carry the charger and not just the cable. The included mini tripod is good quality, and it also has rubber feet on the bottom, so you have confidence when you put it down that it's going to hold the gimbal upright. And using that mini tripod makes it super easy to actually balance the gimbal as well, that we can just set it down and use both hands to actually balance the gimbal. You don't have to hold it with one hand and try balancing it with the other. Put it down on a surface, balance the gimbal, then we can pick it up and actually use it. And I tend to keep the tripod attached pretty much all the time because it just makes it a lot easier to actually use and move the gimbal. But if you want, you can take it off and attach pretty much anything else you want. For instance, a base plate to be able to attach it to another tripod. There's also another 1/4-20 on the back of the gimbal, so you can actually attach things like a magic arm and put a light or a microphone or an external monitor to it. The base plate included is a Manfrotto PL501 quick release plate, so you can actually use this on a Manfrotto tripod, which makes it easy to switch the camera between the tripod and the gimbal. And the final design point I wanted to look at was the positioning of these motors and the arms, because it gives you an unobstructed view of your camera, so you can use the camera screen and the buttons without the motor getting in the way, because most other gimbals have a motor which is set up here, which gets really frustrating, especially have a flip out screen that you can easily just flip the screen out without the motor getting in the way. It just makes it so much easier and user friendly. So now let's take a look at the different modes this gimbal has and the different ways we have to access them and change them. So there are 2 ways to actually change the modes on the gimbal. We can use the button on the top left here, and we can press it and it will update on the screen of what mode we're actually in. We can single press it, double press it, or triple press it depending on what mode we actually want, and it will update on the screen. The other way, and the way I use it, is by touching the screen. When you press the mode on the screen, it will cycle through them all. HF is panning mode, meaning it will pan left to right and not up or down or roll. TF is follow mode, meaning it will pan left and right and up and down, but not roll. AF is all follow mode, meaning it will follow your movements left, right, up and down, and it will even roll from side to side. In this mode, you can even turn the gimbal upside down. And finally, you have LK, which is lock mode, meaning all axes are locked and the camera will stay fixed. You can then use the joystick to point the camera in the direction you want, and then no matter where you move the gimbal, the camera will stay in the same place. A triple press on the power button enters selfie mode. Being able to see the mode you're in on the screen and no longer having to remember those double, triple presses and LED flashes like other gimbals, having it on that screen makes it so much easier to know which mode you're in and which mode you want to change to. It makes it so user-friendly, so much easier to use, and pretty much a game changer, and I don't think I could go back to another gimbal that doesn't have an LCD screen. And there are more options than just the modes on the screen. If we slide to the right, we can change lots more settings. A few useful ones are capture mode, which allows you to change the sensitivity of the gimbal. I quite like mine set on smooth. In settings, we can calibrate the gimbal if it's not acting correctly. Auto rotation allows us to set 2 points that the gimbal will pan between. In rotation time, we can set our parameters of how fast we want it to pan, and even set how often we want it to take a picture for a time lapse. And at this stage, if you haven't connected your camera to the gimbal, you can still do those auto rotations. If you just set up how long you want it to rotate from point A to point B, say 10 seconds, you can then just go into auto rotation. It will say then put it into position 1, so say I wanted it there. I can hit OK, move it again to position 2. It will then go back to position 1. I can literally click record on the camera. It will then pan to position 2, and then I can just click record again to stop that recording. If the camera was connected to the gimbal, it will automatically start recording or taking pictures like a time lapse on those auto rotation settings you input into the gimbal. And talking of connecting the camera to the gimbal, there are a few different ways. You can use the supplied cables, or if your camera supports it, you can connect via Bluetooth and Wi-Fi without the need of a cable. And that's actually how I connected it, was through the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi of the camera, not through the actual cable, because when I used the cable, sometimes the buttons just didn't seem to work as they should. So when I connected my GH5 to the gimbal via the Wi-Fi, I seemed to have full control. I could start and stop recording, take pictures, and if I scroll to the left on the LCD screen, I could change my ISO and even the white balance, which is really useful. And when my GH5 was connected to the gimbal via the Wi-Fi, it meant that I could actually use the wheel on the side to control my focus, which was quite incredible, that I didn't actually have to have any other follow focus mechanisms connected to it. I could use the wheel on the side to control the focus of my camera. And you can control the sensitivity of the wheel in settings and then in the scroll settings. But I would have liked to have been able to fine tune it. It seemed to be a little bit too sensitive or not quite enough. And if you press the wheel in, this will also act as a button and it will change the wheel's mode. But the zoom feature didn't work for me. That's probably due to the lens I was using. And that is something that I need to point out, that focus wheel only worked on a certain lens. The Micro Four Thirds Leica lens on the GH5 worked fine, but using the Viltrox adapter with the Sigma 18 to 35mm lens meant that the actual focus wheel didn't work at all. I don't know if that's because of the adapter stopping the signal go through to the lens, or it only works on Micro Four Thirds like native lenses. I'm not really sure why. It's a shame that it doesn't work on all lenses, but having the ability for it to work on some lenses is a good thing. I just wish it worked on any lens I put onto the camera. But to get around this, you could buy a follow focus to use the wheel, to use the follow focus to be able to focus any lens, but that obviously is an extra cost and doesn't come included with this gimbal. And if we press the arrow button at the bottom right of the LCD screen, we can then use the wheel to control the gimbal's position. And going back to actually connecting the camera to the gimbal, the first time I did this via Wi-Fi, I had to use the Feiyu Go app. And once it was set up, I made sure that I had the latest firmware installed. And for me, once I set it up the first time, I no longer had to use that app. The camera would automatically connect to the gimbal. Once I turned the Wi-Fi on the camera, it would see it and it would connect to it. I didn't have to use the app every single time, which would get frustrating if I had to do that. But for me, it just connected straight to the gimbal every time I turned the Wi-Fi on my camera. But if you want, you can actually use the app to change different settings on the gimbal, or as a remote control to actually control the gimbal, which is pretty cool, but personally I wouldn't ever use this feature. So overall, I am really impressed with this gimbal. It just seems to be a very user-friendly gimbal and it gets the job done. Having that screen, the LCD touchscreen, makes it so user-friendly. To be able to see the mode you're in and to be able to easily change the different modes and physically see it with no longer having to remember those double, triple, quadruple presses, different LED flashes and stuff, that really is a game changer. I mean, the gimbal isn't perfect. There are a few things that did frustrate me slightly. For instance, the cable connection just didn't seem to properly work. When I press a button, it didn't seem to correspond back to the camera as I wanted it to. And when I was connected through the actual cable, I couldn't use the focus wheel to control the focus of my camera's lens, which was slightly annoying. I could only do that through the Wi-Fi. There's a few sensitivity issues that I wish that I could fine-tune the sensitivity of a few things. And like I said at the very beginning, I wish there was a few locks on the actual motors when I was traveling around with it. It wouldn't just flip around and spin around and stuff. But overall, this gimbal is a great gimbal. For £380 or around that price, this is a really, really good buy, and it is my now go-to gimbal. I've been using it ever since it was sent to me 3 months ago, and I should probably point out actually that FeiyuTech did send me this for a review, an unpaid and unbiased review. This is my honest opinion of it, and I have been using it from all of my jobs and all of my shoots ever since it arrived in my house, and I do thoroughly enjoy and like using this gimbal. But I'd love to know what you think of this gimbal. Let me know in the comment section down below. What do you think of the FeiyuTech AK2000? And I think that's going to be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you found this video interesting and informative. If you have, please give it a big fat thumbs up, as it means so much to me that you like these videos. And until next time, keep on creating.